Hi friends, good morning. Welcome to Shankaran AI Study Circle. This is Dr. Harinath Reddy, Director of the Institute. Today in this particular video, we will discuss Pesa Act 1996. Pesa Act 1996. Pesa Act 1996. Pesa, what do you mean by Pesa? Pesa means Panchayats extension to Scheduled Areas Act 1996. Panchayats extension to Scheduled Areas Act 1996. Remember, when we have discussed about the 73rd Amendment to the Indian Constitution, 74th Amendment to the Indian Constitution, we have said there that the provisions of the 73rd Amendment and the provisions of the 74th Amendment, they are exempted from applicability in certain areas. So they don't apply. In other words, the provisions of the 73rd Amendment and the provisions of the 74th Amendment, they do not apply to the 5th schedule areas and the 6th schedule areas under Article 244. Article 244. Article 244 of the Indian Constitution deals with the 5th schedule and the 6th schedule areas. So the 73rd Amendment and the 74th Amendments, they speak about exemption of these areas when it comes to the provisions of the 73rd and the 74th Amendments. In other words, the provisions of the 73rd Amendment and the 74th Amendment, they do not apply directly to the 5th schedule and the 6th schedule areas. And why this is done? This is done because the tribals in this country are the most backward and disadvantaged communities in this country. They have a distinct culture, tradition of their own, and they were given constitutional safeguards to protect their interests. So keeping all this in mind, Parliament is empowered. 73rd Amendment and the 74th Amendment, they have empowered Parliament to extend the provisions of the 73rd Amendment and the provisions of the 74th Amendment to the 5th schedule and the 6th schedule areas with such exceptions and modifications whichever is necessary to protect the interests of the tribal communities. So accordingly, in 1996, the provisions of the 73rd Amendment to the Indian Constitution, that is the 3-tier Panchayat Raj system, was extended to the 5th schedule areas in 1992 by the Parliament by enacting a legislation called Pesa Act 1996. Panchayats extension to schedule areas. So the 3-tier Panchayat Raj system was extended to the 5th schedule areas through this law, Panchayats Extension to Scheduled Areas Act 1996. Remember, this legislation was enacted on the recommendations of a committee headed by Dilip Singh Bhuria. Dilip Singh Bhuria. So he is an MP from Madhya Pradesh. Dilip Singh Bhuria was a member of Parliament from the state of Madhya Pradesh. So under the chairmanship of Dilip Singh Bhuria committee, a committee was appointed, and on the recommendations of this committee, Pesa Act was enacted by the Indian Parliament. So students must also remember here, though the provisions of the 73rd Amendment were extended to the 5th schedule areas, the provisions of the 74th Amendment to the 5th schedule areas were not extended even by today. Even there is a provision in the 74th Amendment. So under the 74th Amendment, we had 3 types of urban local bodies: Nagara Panchayat, Municipal Council, Municipal Corporation. The provisions of the 74th Amendment can be extended to the 5th schedule areas by the Indian Parliament by enacting a legislation with such suitable modifications and exceptions whatever is necessary. So far, for extending the provisions of the 74th Amendment to the 5th schedule areas, Parliament has not enacted a law. In 2001, there was one bill which was introduced in the Indian Parliament for extending the provisions of the municipalities to the 5th schedule areas. This bill could not be passed by then, and subsequently there was no initiative from the Union government to extend the provisions of the 74th Amendment to the 5th schedule areas. So here students must be very clear, as of now, till now, only the Panchayati Raj institutions under the 73rd Amendment were extended to the 5th schedule areas. But the urban local self-governing institutions which are created through the 74th Amendment were not yet extended to the 5th schedule areas. So here my question is, before 1996, in the 5th schedule areas, there were no PRIs. The 3-tier Panchayat Raj system was absent in the 5th schedule areas before 1996. So in other words, 5th schedule areas had local self-governing institutions in the form of Panchayat Raj institutions from 1996 only, but before there were no PRIs. So before 1996, if there were no PRIs, Panchayat Raj institutions in the 5th schedule areas, then how they are administered? So the governor has got a special responsibility. So in every state with a 5th schedule area, there will be a body called Tribes Advisory Council. Tribes Advisory Council. It has a strength of 20. So there are around 10 to 11 states which have got 5th schedule areas. In all the states with 5th schedule areas, the governor will administer the 5th schedule areas on the advice of TSC, Tribes Advisory Council. So Tribes Advisory Council will contain members to the extent of 20. The strength of the Tribes Advisory Council is 20. Usually, the Chief Minister of the state will be the chairman of the Tribes Advisory Council, and the ST MLAs in the concerned state legislative assembly will be given representation in the TSC, and some of the members will be nominated by the state government. So here my point is, before 1996, 5th schedule areas are governed by the governor on the recommendations of Tribes Advisory Council. So this is the administrative mechanism. Before 1996 in the 5th schedule areas. But this got changed with the enactment of Pesa. Remember, the 5th schedule areas are one of the resource rich areas. So they have very rich forest resources, mineral resources. So usually the forest contractor, the money lender, and even mining contractor, these are the people who want to exploit these areas for making profits. So the tribals in the 5th schedule areas, they are more susceptible to exploitation by mining contractors, then forest contractors, and even money lenders. So, and because of the exploitation of these categories of the people, these people will be dislocated in these areas, they will be losing their livelihood, and there will be livelihood insecurity for these people. So keeping all this in mind, so to protect the livelihood securities of the tribals in the 5th schedule areas, a number of safeguards were inserted in the Pesa Act 1996 to protect the traditional and the customary rights of the tribal communities. So this is the intention of Pesa Act 1996. Pesa Act 1996 promises self-governance to the tribals in the 5th schedule areas. And in the very beginning, I want to communicate to the students, there is a big difference between the PRIs in other parts of the country when compared with the PRIs in the 5th schedule areas. So in the 5th schedule areas, Gram Sabha enjoys wider powers compared to the Gram Sabha in other parts of the country. So Gram Sabha under the 73rd Amendment in 5th schedule areas was given sweeping powers, very wide powers. So Gram Sabha in the 5th schedule areas is much more powerful. Gram Sabha in the 5th schedule areas is much more powerful compared to the Gram Sabha in areas other than the 5th schedule areas. So this the student must keep in mind. This is very, very important. And then let's move to what is there in the legislation. See, as I told you earlier, scheduled areas, because of their richness in natural resources, are historically, not just in the recent past, from a very long time, they are susceptible to pressure from unscrupulous elements indulging in illegal mining, forest felling, leading to land alienation, exploitation and a dislocation of the communities and a loss of major source of livelihood. So this is the problem. That's why to protect the interests of the tribal communities, the provisions of the 73rd Amendment were extended to these areas very carefully, keeping in mind the traditional and the customary practices of the tribals in these areas. Then that's why it was very important that the customs, rights and the livelihoods of those living in scheduled areas need to be protected. And exactly that's the reason why Pesa Act 1996 was enacted. And then see, the provisions of the Panchayats extension to the Scheduled Areas Act 1996. Remember, it's very important for the students to know it is not enough if the Parliament made a law on extending the provisions of the PRIs or the 73rd Amendment to the 5th schedule areas. Keeping Pesa Act 1996 as a model law, every state with the 5th schedule areas also has to make a law. So in all the states where there are 5th schedule areas, the concerned state legislature must make a law extending the provisions of the 73rd Amendment to the 5th schedule areas, keeping in mind the Pesa Act 1996. So it is not enough if there is a parliamentary law. We need a law made by the concerned state legislature in every state with 5th schedule areas. That's why here you can see. Here schedule areas means the schedule areas as referred to in class 1 of article 244 of the Constitution. I told article 244 of the Indian Constitution deals with 5th schedule and the 6th schedule areas. Article 244 class 1 deals with the 5th schedule areas. Article 244 class 2 deals with the tribal areas, that is the 6th schedule areas. And then see here, the legislature of a state shall not make any law which is inconsistent with. So that's why after the Pesa Act 1996 was enacted by the Parliament, this law says in all the states where there are 5th schedule areas, to give self-governance to the tribals in the 5th schedule areas, the concerned state legislature must also make a law. But when the concerned state legislature makes a law for that purpose, it must follow what is there in the Pesa Act. What is there in the Pesa Act? The Pesa Act very clearly says, the legislature of a state shall not make any law which is inconsistent with the following. So there are certain things which are mentioned in the Pesa Act 1996 which protect the interests of the tribal communities. So any law made by any concerned state legislature must not be in conflict with what is there in the Pesa Act 1996. Then let's see what is there in the Pesa Act. So a law made by the concerned state legislature with a 5th schedule areas, see here, a state legislation of the panchayats may be made, shall be in consonance with the customary law, social and religious practices and traditional management practices of community resources. This is one requirement. So, the state legislatures with 5th schedule areas, when they make a state law on panchayats, they must keep in mind that particular law is not in conflict with religious practices, traditional management practices of community resources. Then, the Pesa Act also gives a definition of village. The Pesa Act also gives a definition of village. Here, a village shall ordinarily consist of a habitation, that is one habitation, or a group of habitations, or other way around, they can be called as a hamlet or a group of hamlets comprising a community. This is very important. Comprising a community and managing its affairs in accordance with the traditions and customs. So, one big reason why Pesa Act 1996 was not properly implemented in letter and spirit is, here when the Gram Sabhas are constituted, they are not constituted close to the people, and as a result, it was not able to play an effective role. So, usually in the tribal areas, the population density is low and the population is scattered. So, when the Gram Sabha and the Grama Panchayat is constituted in the sparsely populated areas like 5th schedule areas, it must be ensured that there is adequate participation of the people in the Grama Panchayat as well as in Gram Sabha, which means Grama Panchayat and Gram Sabha shall be constituted in such a way that they are close to people and there is a greater possibility for the people to participate. But this is not, actually on the ground, this is not kept in mind. That's one important point. Then in addition to this legislation also gives a definition of Gram Sabha. We have been defining Gram Sabha for a very long time. Gram Sabha contains all the eligible voters in that particular village. Same is the definition given here as well. Every village shall have a Gram Sabha consisting of persons whose names are included in the electoral rolls for the panchayat at the village level. And then here, every Gram Sabha shall be competent to safeguard and preserve the traditions and customs of the people, their cultural identity, community resources, and the customary mode of dispute resolution. In other words, Pesa Act 1996 very clearly confers powers on the Gram Sabha. So, what are the powers of the Gram Sabha? The powers of the Gram Sabha, they relate to safeguarding and preserving the traditions and customs of the people, their cultural identity, community resources, and the customary mode of dispute resolution. So, these are the areas where the Gram Sabha will enjoy powers. That's one important point. Then in addition to this, see the other powers of the Gram Sabha. I told Gram Sabha in the 5th schedule areas is much more powerful compared to the Gram Sabha in the areas other than the 5th schedule areas. Let's see the powers of the Gram Sabha. See here. Gram Sabha has the following power. What is that power? Gram Sabha shall approve. Gram Sabha has the power to approve the plans, programs and projects for social and economic development before such plans, programs and projects are taken up for implementation by the panchayat at the village level. See here, this is very beautiful point. So, Grama Panchayat headed by Sarpanch, Upa Sarpanch and ward members, before they actually take up implementation of the plans, projects and programs, they should get first approval from Gram Sabha. So, only when the Gram Sabha authorizes through prior approval, then only plans, projects and programs can be taken up for implementation. In other words, Gram Sabha is given control over Grama Panchayat. Gram Sabha exercises control over Grama Panchayat, and this is very important. If Gram Sabha is not empowered, then Panchayati Raj in this country will become Sarpanch Raj. So Gram Sabha, it is a tool of direct democracy. Gram Sabha is the platform where the people directly participate in the issues which relate to them. That's why this point says plans, programs and projects for social and economic development, before they are implemented, they must get the approval from Gram Sabha. That's very important point. Then, in addition to this, Pesa Act very clearly says who is responsible for the identification of the beneficiaries. It is Gram Sabha in the 5th schedule areas. Remember, once upon a time, the earlier Prime Minister of India, Rajiv Gandhi, said, out of every 1 rupee spent by governments, only 20 paise reaches the common man. So there are a number of leakages. So that's why even today, a number of schemes which are being implemented by the central and the state governments, they don't reach the deserving sections. The reason is identification of the beneficiary, if it is done at the Gram Sabha level, where people participate, then you can eliminate errors of inclusion and errors of exclusion. Those who deserve to be included are not included. Those who deserve to be excluded, they are not excluded, because identification of the beneficiary is not done at the grassroots level through Gram Sabha. And as a result, so lakhs of crores of money which is being spent by the central and the state governments, they don't reach the deserving sections. That's why under the Pesa Act 1996, this particular point says that identification of the beneficiaries is done by Gram Sabha. Gram Sabha is nothing but the voters in that particular village. They know who is genuinely poor, who needs a pension, who needs a Arogyashri card. So when identification of the beneficiary is done at the village level through Gram Sabha, we can eliminate, we can reduce errors of inclusion and errors of exclusion. That's why this is very important point. Then, in addition to this, every panchayat at the village level shall be required to obtain from the Gram Sabha a certificate of utilization of funds by that panchayat. So here the third point, what does it say is, after the Grama Panchayat spends money, then subsequently Grama Panchayat must also get a certificate of utilization of funds from Gram Sabha. After spending money, Grama Panchayat shall go back to Gram Sabha and get a certificate of how the money is spent. So this is again very important point. Then, so Pesa Act 1996 also says that in the 5th schedule areas which are dominated by tribals, there could be even non-tribals. So that's why Pesa Act 1996 says that in the 5th schedule areas, when the 3-tier Panchayat Raj system is set up, district Panchayat, intermediate Panchayat and a Grama Panchayat, seats at all the 3 levels shall be given to the STs in proportion to their population. That's the point. Reservation of seats in the scheduled areas at every Panchayat shall be in proportion to the population of the communities in that Panchayat for whom reservation is sought. Then in addition to this, the reservation for the scheduled tribes shall not be less than 1/2 of the total number of seats. In any case, whether at the district Panchayat level or at the intermediate Panchayat level or at the Grama Panchayat level, out of the total number of seats, at least 50 shall be for STs. At least 50. So it shall not be less than 50. That is one condition which the Pesa Act puts. So at all the 3 tiers in the PRIs, the seats which are reserved for the scheduled tribes shall not be less than 50%. So that's again very important. In addition to this, Pesa Act 1996 also says, offices of the chairpersons, all the offices of the chairpersons at all the 3 levels in the 5th schedule areas relating to the 3-tier Panchayat system shall be reserved for STs. So chairperson of Jilla Panchayat, chairperson of intermediate Panchayat, chairperson of Grama Panchayat shall always be a scheduled tribe. That's what this point says. All seats of chairpersons of panchayats at all levels shall be reserved for the scheduled caste. So a non-scheduled tribe cannot be a chairperson of Grama Panchayat, cannot be a chairperson of intermediate panchayat, cannot be a chairperson of district panchayat. That's the point. Then in addition to this, the state government may nominate persons belonging to such scheduled tribes as having no representation in the panchayat at the intermediate level or the panchayat at the district level. So if there are different scheduled tribes in the 5th schedule areas, for any reason, if one category of the scheduled tribes are not getting adequate representation in the panchayats at the intermediate level and at the district level, then the concerned state government can give representation to those underrepresented scheduled tribes through nomination. So in the 5th schedule areas, if there is a particular scheduled tribe whose numerical population is low, and if they are not able to get representation in the panchayats at the intermediate and at the district level, such a scheduled tribe can be given representation through nomination. That's the point. But here again there is a condition. Nomination shall not exceed 1/10 of the total members to be elected in that panchayat. So if the state government tries to give representation to certain tribal communities who are underrepresented in the panchayat at the district or at the intermediate level or even at the Grama Panchayat level, not Grama Panchayat, intermediate and district panchayat level, nomination can be done. But nominated persons, what can be the total strength? 1/10. It cannot be more than 1/10. For example, if the total number of seats in the district panchayat is 100, only 10 out of the 100 can be appointed through nomination, but not more than 10. That's one more important point. Then, so when land is acquired for any developmental project in the 5th schedule areas, consultation with the Gram Sabha is very important. Here the word used is consultation, not consent. Consent means approval of the Gram Sabha is compulsory. Remember, when bauxite mining is sought to be done in the Niyamgiri hills, and when this matter went before the Supreme Court of India, the Supreme Court asked the mining company, Vedanta company, to take the consent of the Gram Sabha, to go before the Gram Sabha, to consult the Gram Sabha and take their consent. So that's why Gram Sabha is very important. So here this says, Gram Sabha or the panchayat at the appropriate level. So it can be Gram Sabha, intermediate panchayat, or even the district panchayat. Any of these three need to be consulted before acquiring land, acquisition of land. Before acquiring land in the scheduled areas for developmental projects. So when land is to be acquired for developmental projects in the 5th schedule areas, such a land can be acquired only with the prior consultation of either Gram Sabha or intermediate panchayat or district panchayat. Even when resettlement and rehabilitation of the affected persons by these projects is to be done, even this has to be done with the prior consultation of the Grama Sabha or the panchayat at the appropriate level. That's what this point says. In addition to this, see the scope of the powers of Gram Sabha or the panchayat in the 5th schedule areas. So planning and management of water bodies. This is one more area where Gram Sabha or the panchayat at the appropriate level will exercise power. Planning and management of minor water bodies in the scheduled areas. So it shall be entrusted to the panchayat at the appropriate level. So it can be district panchayat or intermediate panchayat or Grama Panchayat, depending upon the situation. In addition to this, if you want to give any license, mining lease for minor minerals in the scheduled areas, so in the 5th schedule areas, when there is a mining of minor minerals, those who does this mining must obtain a lease, and this lease must be given only with the recommendation of the Gram Sabha or the panchayat at the appropriate level. For mining minor minerals in the 5th schedule areas, a lease must be obtained with the prior recommendation of the Gram Sabha or the Panchayat at the appropriate level. That's what the Pesa Act 1996 says. In addition to this, in the 5th schedule areas, the intoxicant drinks, so it is prohibition or regulation or restriction of the sale and consumption of any intoxicant. So with respect to any intoxicant, whether it is prohibition, regulation or a restriction of the sale and consumption of any intoxicant, with respect to this, the power will be exercised by the Gram Sabha or the Panchayat at the appropriate level. In addition to this, ownership of the minor forest produce. Pesa Act 1996 also confers ownership of the minor forest produce on the Gram Sabha. In addition to this, Gram Sabha or the Panchayat at the appropriate level, they also have the power to prevent alienation of the land in the scheduled areas and to take appropriate action to restore any unlawfully alienated land of scheduled tribes. Remember, in most of the 5th schedule areas, there is a rampant tribal land alienation. Lands which belong to the tribals are taken away by non-tribals. So there is a huge indebtedness on the part of the tribes. The tribes, they borrow left and right for their purposes from the non-tribals, and when they are not in a position to repay the debt, they are giving away their loans to non-tribals. But according to the 5th schedule, tribals have got inalienable land rights. The land rights of the tribals can never be taken away by non-tribals. So despite this safeguard in the constitution, on the field, at the grassroots level, there is a rampant tribal land alienation. The lands of the tribals are taken over by non-tribals. So to deal with this problem, to prevent tribal land alienation to non-tribals, the power is entrusted to Gram Sabha or the Panchayat at the appropriate level. In addition to this, the Gram Sabha is also given the power to manage village markets. Gram Sabha is also given the power to manage village markets. In addition to this, as I told, money lender is one of the biggest exploiter in these areas. So Gram Sabha is also given the power to regulate money lending, to control money lending in the 5th schedule areas. In addition to this, Gram Sabha also can exercise control over institutions and functionaries in all the social sectors. So the institutions which are working for the benefit of the tribals in the 5th schedule areas and even the bureaucracy working in these institutions, they are subjected to the control of the Gram Sabha. So Gram Sabha can exercise control over the institutions and also the functionaries, the employees of these institutions in these areas. Again, this is very beautiful. And the Gram Sabha was also given the power to have control over local plans and resources. Gram Sabha was also given the power to have control over local plans and resources, including tribal subplans. In addition to this, remember, see this point is very, very important. The state legislature that may endow panchayats with powers and authority as may be necessary to enable them to function as institutions of self-government shall contain safeguards to ensure that the panchayat at the higher level do not assume the powers and authority of any panchayat at the lower level or of the Gram Sabha. So at many places we said the Gram Sabha or the panchayat at the appropriate level can do this, can do that. But here Pesa Act 1996 also very clearly says the powers which genuinely must be with Gram Sabha cannot be taken away by intermediate panchayat. The powers which are genuinely to be with intermediate panchayat cannot be taken away by the panchayat at the higher level. But this is not implemented in letter and spirit. So this point says that any law which is made by the concerned state legislature in the 5th schedule areas must ensure that these PRIs in the 5th schedule areas are allowed to become institutions of self-government. While doing so, the panchayat at the higher level shall not take away the powers of the panchayat below it. This is one safeguard which is mentioned in the Pesa Act 1996, but unfortunately it is not implemented. In addition, this is again very important point. See, the big difference between the 5th schedule and the 6th schedule areas is 6th schedule areas were given greater autonomy compared to the 5th schedule areas. So, in states like Assam, Meghalaya, Mizoram and Tripura, there are 6th schedule councils. So, these autonomous councils in the 6th schedule areas, they enjoy wider powers, executive powers, legislative powers and even judicial powers. That is why they are called state within a state. So, here Pesa Act 1996 very clearly says the pattern of autonomy which is there in the 6th schedule areas must be created even in the 5th schedule areas. See, before 1996, schedule areas were administered by the governor on the advice of the TSC, but from the very beginning in the 6th schedule areas, administration is done by the autonomous regional councils, autonomous district council, where the tribals are represented through representatives. So, the administrative mechanism in the 6th schedule areas is much more participative and autonomous compared to the 5th schedule areas. But in the 5th schedule areas, PRIs were set up only from 1996. But even now, after the PRIs were set up, when you compare the administrative mechanism in the 5th and the 6th schedule areas, it is in the 6th schedule areas where the administration is much more autonomous and independent compared to the 5th schedule areas. That is why when the Pesa Act 1996 was made, Parliament itself very clearly said, when administrative setup is made in the 5th schedule areas, it must be kept in mind that the pattern of administration in the 6th schedule areas must be kept in mind. What does that mean? Even in the 5th schedule areas, lot of autonomy shall be given to the Panchayat Raj institutions to administer themselves. That is giving self-governance to the tribals in the 5th schedule areas on the lines of the 6th schedule areas. That is one important point. Then, as I told you before, as of now, the provisions of the 73rd Amendment were extended to the 5th schedule areas, but the provisions of the 74th Amendment relating to urban local self-governing institutions are yet to be extended to the 5th schedule areas. And that is why there was a provision in the 73rd Amendment as well as in the 74th Amendment. In the 73rd Amendment, what does that say? See, when the provisions of the 74th Amendment were not extended to the 5th schedule areas, then how the urban areas in the 5th schedule areas have to be governed? Whatever legislations are already in place before the commencement of the 74th Amendment, under those laws, administration of the urban areas in the 5th schedule areas can be done. This is what Jharkhand High Court has said. Jharkhand High Court has said. Then what is this point? The provisions of the 73rd Amendment were extended to the 5th schedule areas relating to rural local self-governing institutions. When it comes to urban local self-governing institutions, the provisions of the 74th Amendment were not extended to 5th schedule areas. In such a situation, how the urban areas in the 5th schedule areas need to be administered? For that, Jharkhand High Court said, as per the provision in the 74th Amendment itself, till the 74th Amendment comes into force, all the laws which are already in force by then, under those laws, administration can be carried on. That is what Jharkhand High Court has said. But this was criticized because if this is allowed, the interests which are promised by the constitution to the tribals will get undermined. So instead, the argument is let the Parliament make a law extending the provisions of the 74th Amendment to the 5th Schedule areas through suitable modifications and exceptions. And as this is not done, Jharkhand High Court says till this is extended, till the provisions of the 74th Amendment were extended to the 5th Schedule areas, 5th Schedule urban areas can be governed under the existing laws. That's the point which I am trying to make. And as I told earlier, in 2001, the Municipalities Extension to Scheduled Areas Act was introduced in the Rajya Sabha. We were discussing Pesa Act, Panchayats Extension to Scheduled Areas Act 1996. This is already done. Provisions of the Panchayats were extended. Similarly, the Municipalities Extension to Scheduled Areas. There was a bill which was introduced in 2001, but this could not be passed even by today. That's the point. And then when it comes to the implementation of Pesa Act 1996, when it comes to the implementation of the Pesa Act 1996, see, bamboo Pesa Act 1996 and the Forest Rights Act 2006, FR Act 2006. Forest Rights Act 2006 says bamboo is part of minor forest produce. But Indian Forest Act 1927 says it is not minor forest produce. It is not minor forest produce. So that's why there are a number of legislations enacted by the Indian Parliament and the state legislatures which are in conflict with PESA. Ideally, these central and state laws which are in conflict with PESA should have been suitably modified, and this is not done. And in addition to this, in 40% of the states which have got 5th Schedule areas, the rules which are necessary for implementing the PESA were not notified. So the union government has got a sweeping powers to compel the states to notify these rules, but the union government has not done anything. So it has did nothing. In addition to this, as I told you, when the Gram Sabhas are constituted, they are not constituted close to the people, and as a result they were not serving useful purpose. In addition to this, Pesa Act 1996 very clearly says panchayats at the higher level must not take away the powers of the panchayats below it, and even this has happened. So if Gram Sabha doesn't give permission for land acquisition, if Gram Sabha doesn't give permission for mining lease for mining minor minerals in the 5th Schedule areas, Gram Sabhas are conveniently bypassed and the panchayat at a higher level is approached and the permissions are met. So in other words, contrary to the spirit of the Pesa Act 1996, panchayats at the higher level are usurping, taking away the powers of the panchayats at the lower level and also taking away the powers of the Gram Sabha. This is one more thing which was happening. So that's why the promise of self-governance, which the Pesa Act has made was not fulfilled. There is a lack of political will, there is lack of political will at the level of the union government and even at the level of the state government, and as a result, Pesa was not implemented in letter and spirit. If Pesa is properly implemented, we can very effectively deal with left-wing extremism or Naxalite movement in this country. So the only hope for dealing with left-wing extremism, that is in the form of Pesa, has failed because of lack of political will on the part of the central and the state governments. So contrary to the spirit of the Pesa Act 1996, even today, Forest Department officials were exercising those powers which are ideally to be exercised by the Gram Sabha or any panchayat at the appropriate level in the 5th Schedule areas. So that's it about Pesa Act 1996 and its implementation. Thank you.